The big story tonight, last week's appointment of the opposition leader Raila Odinga to the African Union as a special envoy for infrastructure development in Africa has left many talking. The latest to come out of that conversation is that the push for a referendum will soon die a natural death after Raila Odinga becomes too busy in his new role. But his supporters are dismissing that notion with sheer scorn, saying Raila Odinga is just like any other person harboring presidential ambitions and also serving in government. Well, in studio for more on this conversation, political analyst David Oseanyi, and joining us now, political strategist Abel Onchari Oyeyo. Many thanks for joining us on the big story tonight. Abel, I begin with you. Those apprehensive of the future of ODM say that Raila Odinga should be cautious about this appointment because it could be bait by his rivals to remove him from the Kenyan political scene. Your take on the impact of this appointment?
I actually think it's bait, and obviously he's made a mistake and taken it, because the moment you appoint Raila to a position that requires him to travel outside the country, I think it becomes irrelevant. And that is why so many guys have come out and said the push for a referendum is going to die.
Right. That
is because he was at the center of the movement for a referendum. Of course, Kenyans cannot forget that Raila is the one who spearheaded the new constitution, which now, he feels like should be changed. Now, at some point, there was a lot of talk about Raila being given a position in the AU so as to get rid of him from national politics. And I think it's detractors and guys who don't want to see him participate in national politics have found a way to actually push him away. Remember, if Raila is not around, then I think we're going to see less of him and hear less of him, which means politically becomes irrelevant.
Right.
So going to 2022, if he maintains his position, he's going to be a non-story in our local politics.
What would inform that? Because, even Otende Amolo earlier on mentioned, Raila Odinga will not be the first active politician appointed by the continental body and then finishes his tenure, goes back to his country to continue with politics. There's been several others. For example, former South African Foreign Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, she was cleared by the AU to be its chairperson. At the end of her tenure, she went back and ran for president in South Africa, although unsuccessful. She still did have quite a bit of support. Why wouldn't the same apply to Raila Odinga?
Yeah, I'd like you to underline the word unsuccessfully. There's a reason why she failed. Now, because she was working so hard for the AU, she was not so much present in South African local politics.
Right.
So, which, of course, obviously contributed to her dismal performance and eventual loss of the presidential contest. That is the same thing that is going to happen to Raila here. And remember, Raila is the kind of politician who works well when he has what we call continuous contact with the people. So the moment you see him traveling to various parts of the continent and obviously outside the continent, it means less and less of Raila is going to be in circulation.
Right.
And that means he's going to actually experience what we call a natural death in politics. Again, for me, it's a scheme that has been successful by guys who want to get rid of Raila as a politician. It is unfortunate he swallowed the bait.
All right, let's bring in David on this. David, do you agree with Abel's take on the same, the natural death of both Raila Odinga's career and the calls for a referendum in the country?
Now, Abel makes a few assumptions. The first assumption he makes is that Raila wants to be president in 2022. The second assumption is that Raila must be in constant touch with the ground if Raila is to remain relevant. Both assumptions are unfounded. Now, I want us to appreciate Raila's appointment against the backdrop of the handshake. I want us to see it for what it is. It is the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, telling the country that I meant it when I said I shook hands with my brother, that I was willing to move the country forward, and that I'm sending my elder brother out there on our behalf. As he puts us on the map globally, we stand a chance to gain locally. Now, if we are going to draw on Raila's desire for presidency in 2022, should he harbor those ambitions, then I would tell you without a doubt that the assumption that his absence from the scene will diminish his influence locally is absolutely far-fetched. Raila is the only politician who, without public office, has been able to remain as a formidable force. Remember, he is the only politician who, since, I bet, July or November 1989, has had his name on the dailies in this country every single day without fail. Now, if this role is going to engage him away from the country, which is another assumption again, because you may end up having him sitting in Nairobi. I am aware that the AU has seats in Addis, the AU has a seat in Tunis, in Zambia, as well as wherever the Prime Minister may want to have, as I saw Madam Monica Juma intimating that they will be willing to support him. If Raila Odinga will decide to sit in Nairobi and accomplish his duties as the High Representative of the AU, on infrastructure development from Nairobi, he may well do that and summon meetings. Of course, he will have to travel to see presidents and other leaders of the different economies in Africa and globally. But I am not too certain that that means he has an itinerary drawn Monday to Friday to go and be having these meetings. These meetings are sparsely populated and strategically held. They may be held within a day, so long as you find all these people together. You may go to the United Nations General Assembly and have a side meeting with all these leaders and accomplish so much. So the assumption that this diminishes Raila's role in the local politics is entirely wrong.
Let's focus for a moment on the assumption, as you call it, that Raila Odinga will be running or may be running for president again in 2022. It is something that the opposition leader has not outrightly alluded to yet. But
exactly.
We've seen a section of ODM members of parliament hinting to the same. In fact, they said that this opposition is going to, take away his chances of clinching the seat in 2022. But he has been at the forefront of pushing for this referendum. Previous calls for referendum have been known to similarly influence political events ahead of the general elections. Let's talk about the 2005 referendum there, pitting the oranges against the bananas there. Raila Odinga, Musalia Mudavadi, William Ruto all coming together. They're in an electrifying campaign, and many believe that they won the discredited 2007 elections. 5 years later, the 2010 referendum there, this time William Ruto goes against the tide and leads a campaign against the enactment of the Constitution. Now, his campaign did not win, but he did position himself, gaining quite a large, quite a lot of support there in his backyard, positioning himself for the 2013 general elections. We're 3 years away from 2022. Could this be an outright way by Raila Odinga, telling Kenyans that he will be running for the seat in 2022?
If this is going to be the basis for political conclusions, then you would know that William Ruto was on the wrong side of the referendum, but still made it to be a deputy president in the country. Now, listen to me. I do not want us to make the assumption that all referendums are about political preservation or about political leaders themselves. I want us to open our eyes and minds a little outside this belief. Of course, I know it seems as though whenever the referendum comes, it's entirely about being strategic so that you clinch power in the next election. But the question is, do we have issues that we need to resolve as a country? Is it possible that the Building the Bridges initiative, which is trying to examine the 9 or 10 points as had been proposed by the Prime Minister, is it possible they would come up with suggestions that may need alteration of the Constitution as a document in order to steer this country out of its current muck, which includes and is not only limited to issues around tribalism and inequality? Now, if these are the realities that we face, then we need to move on with that conversation based on those issues and not on politics. And again, as I said, when that time comes, when the referendum time comes, the questions will be brought. We are not even too sure it will come. All right, they have suggested, of course. Raila Odinga has been at the forefront of suggesting we need a referendum, and he has very salient facts and issues raised to try and resolve Kenya's place in the future. But whether or not that will come is for time to tell again, Michelle.
All right. Abel, let me bring you in on this. On the calls for a referendum, we seem to be seeing a convergence of heavyweights agreeing that the country does need a referendum. I remember during the funeral of the late Joseph Kamaru, President Uhuru Kenyatta, Deputy President William Ruto, as well as opposition leader Raila Odinga, seem to agree that a referendum should take place. But they differ on what should change in the referendum there, because we're talking about a team there that says ongeza and another team that says punguza when it comes to the referendum. So with Raila Odinga's absence, are we still talking about a referendum push that is dead? Because we've seen, both the president and the deputy seemingly throw their weight behind the scene.
Well, I don't think Kenyans are interested in a referendum in the first place. And you remember at some point before the handshake, the president was very categorical. He said after the elections, Kenyans have a new constitution, of course, which was promulgated back in 2010. He said the issue of going back to talk to Kenyans about a referendum is concluded. It's not needed. And I think because of pressure, that is when, that's why they decided to come out and say, okay, if that is what's supposed to be, discussed, let's have the conversation. But you see, the champion of the referendum is Raila. And the moment he's out of, the country and doing all what he's doing now, right. I don't think it's going to get a champion like him. And again, it's not even about what the political class wants. It's not about what Raila wants or the president wants or the deputy president wants. It's about what Kenyans want. Kenyans have not forgotten that the deputy president opposed the constitution as we have it today. Raila was at the forefront, of course, with the retired president, Kibaki, in pushing for it. Now, in an about turn, the former prime minister wants a referendum to change some elements in the constitution. What has happened? We don't know. So Kenyans are actually suffering. They're not interested in a referendum. And if it's going to be held, if that happens, the focus is on reducing the number of positions. So the absence of the former prime minister in the country, of course, reduces the appetite for a referendum. And remember, we're talking about someone who is in government now. Raila's salary will be processed by the Kenyan government. So are we likely to see, him getting the kind of support he's always gotten as an opposition leader, because now he's a member of the government?
And those who say he needs to be very careful because this could be bait by his political rivals who stands to benefit the most from this appointment.
Yeah, exactly, because, he cannot now go to the outside of the government and begin talking about, we need this, we don't need that, and all that. He cannot oppose the government he works for. And again, remember, when we talk about a position in the AU, the AU has been a toothless bulldog for so long now. So many things happen within the continent with the AU watching and doing nothing. So Raila's position, as much as, of course, I like it, he's gotten it, and, of course, I join the rest of Kenyans in saying congratulations to the former Prime Minister. The position does not, have the kind of power Raila could want to have as a leader. In fact, if I were him, I'd prefer something that is within the country here, so that he remains here and it continues being relevant.
And it doesn't say that Raila Odinga seems to have some sort of grip, really, on a section of the Kenyan electorate, and for that reason, they do not think that this appointment will jeopardize his political standing in any way in the country. This is a man who had such a grip that during the 2005 referendum, pitting oranges against bananas, but the very basis that he had read the document and did not like it, a section of Kenyans decided we do not need to read the document. We're going to vote no for this document. This is the same man who has been pushing for this referendum. How specifically will this appointment kill the referendum push?
Now, we don't expect Raila, who is now an AU employee, representing the Kenyan government, of course, in some way, to actually, again, play so much of local politics, which means we expect him to talk about infrastructure in different parts of the continent instead of talking about local politics. Now, if he continues addressing local issues and playing local politics, he'll be, viewed as someone who's not even understanding his new role as a, a high representative to the AU in charge of infrastructure and all that. So he has to take up his responsibilities and behave as such. So local politics has to be something he has to stop talking about.
Let me come to you, David, just for a moment. Abel, you were earlier on explaining what role Raila Odinga will be playing in this appointment. ODM Minority Whip Junet Mohammed also said this role actually enhances his standing as presidential material. So how is this appointment expected to enhance his standing and perhaps cement his role in Kenyan politics?
Well, I do not speak for the minority whip, but let me first say here, I do not want us to be obsessed with high-octane politics and make it sinful for political antagonists to come to a table of agreement. Because what Abel is trying to peddle is that essentially we should always have one side pulling away from the other, that Raila should be in the country pulling away from President Uhuru Kenyatta. It is possible to hold your opponent in check without high-octane politics. Now, he also intimated that Kenyans do not want a referendum, and I don't know who he speaks for. For all I know, if you asked Kenyans whether they would opt for a referendum that secures their future or not, they would go for it. Kenyans would want a referendum that would ensure that institutions that are mandated to deal with fighting corruption are strengthened. Kenyans would choose a referendum that ensures that the judicial processes in this country run the full hog and are able to expedite some of these cases like they have been trying to do. Kenyans would choose a referendum that ensures we do not have this problem of negative ethnicity, because we are an extremely ethnocentric country. And with that knowledge, therefore, suffice to say, we have to try and create or craft something that forestalls imminent problems in the future. Now, Junet Mohammed says that if Raila is given, because of this role, now that he has been given this role, it increases his, it emboldens his stature as a presidential material. Certainly, yes. Very few people have the obvious advantage of engaging with the development partners at that level ahead of any election. So should Raila decide, and that's why I'm saying we are making an assumption. Raila hasn't said he will run. But should he decide to run for political office, definitely, this role gives him a broad network that he already enjoyed, but farms it up and crosses over globally to build friends who will then appreciate him for what he is able to do, especially if he is able to deliver on his mandate rather quickly and in the short term ahead of an election if he wants to run for that position. But I am waiting for Raila Odinga to say that he would want to run for presidency.
All right, final comment for you, Abel, as we wind up the show. This appointment comes just months after the Kenyatta-Odinga handshake and later on the Building Bridges initiative, expected to spearhead a process of cohesion and nation building for the country. Where does this leave the process of healing for the country and the Building Bridges initiative?
Now, obviously, I expect the Prime Minister's supporters like David here to keep on, pushing for him, which is fine. But I don't want them to just turn a blind eye to realities of politics. Number two, I expect, of course, the appointment, which is, of course, in the spirit of healing, to actually enhance the whole idea of a handshake. What I'd advise the former Prime Minister to do is to create space for other leaders in the opposition, to occupy that, the leadership vacuum is going to create, so as to make sure, keeping the government in check continues. And something else I think that has to be done is to talk about the issue of the referendum in a way that is reflective or representative of the people's ideas. Now, Kenyans are tired of issues of referendums and elections and all that. We just cleared an election which was very acrimonious and so much money was spent, actually, let's say wasted. So a referendum will take us back to that kind of heated environment. So, and because Raila is the center of it, the moment he gets out of the country, of course, to perform his new duties, I expect that kind of conversation to go down. Remember, the deputy president was not for the idea of a referendum. Because of maybe pressure here and there, he moved in and said, okay, if we must have it, let's have it. With Raila out, that is going to tone down. And I think that is going to be for the benefit of Kenyans. All
right, political strategist Abel Ochari there. So we have to cut you off, Abel. We're out of time. Many thanks for joining us on the show tonight. We also have David Osian, who is a political analyst, discussing emerging issues around Raila Odinga's appointment to the African Union. And that is the big story tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. Good night.